Open the envelope only if they turn against you, my husband wrote before he died. And 3 days after we buried him, my daughter-in-law smiled across the dining table and told me the house would be better off without me in it. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply folded my napkin beside my untouched salad and listened to the grandfather clock ticking in the corner of the room Daniel had spent 20 years restoring with his own hands. The dining room felt colder without him there. Even the chandelier seemed dimmer somehow, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table where our family had celebrated birthdays, graduations, and Christmas dinners for more than 3 decades. Vanessa sat at the far end with one leg crossed elegantly over the other, a glass of white wine balanced carefully between her fingers. She wore black for the funeral, but her lipstick tonight was bright red, too alive for a grieving daughter-in-law. Ethan sat beside her, staring down at his plate like a schoolboy waiting for permission to leave the table. My son had Daniel's eyes but none of his steadiness. Not anymore. The utilities alone on this place must be overwhelming, Vanessa said lightly, cutting into her salmon. And honestly, Margaret, a smaller condo might suit your lifestyle better now. Lifestyle. Such a polite word for exile. I reached for my water glass slowly because my hands suddenly felt older than 67. Outside the bay windows, rain tapped softly against the darkened backyard where Daniel used to trim the hedges every Sunday morning, while listening to old jazz records through the garage speakers. Everything in this house still carried pieces of him. His reading glasses remained beside the recliner in the den. His navy raincoat still hung near the mudroom door. Yesterday I found one of his handwritten grocery lists tucked into a kitchen drawer between coupons and old receipts. Buy coffee. Call Margaret's Pharmacy. Roses for anniversary. Small ordinary things that somehow hurt more than the funeral itself. Mom, Ethan finally muttered without looking at me. Vanessa's just trying to help. Help. I almost smiled at the word. For 15 years Vanessa had perfected the art of sounding helpful while quietly removing me from my own family one careful step at a time. First it was holiday schedules, then private vacations, then entire conversations happening around me instead of with me. Daniel used to notice it too. He never confronted her directly, but late at night after everyone had gone home, he would sit beside me in bed and say things like, "Pay attention to the silences, Maggie. People reveal themselves there." At the time I thought he was being overly cautious. Daniel trusted too little. I trusted too much. Somewhere between those two flaws, our family learned how to fracture quietly. Vanessa dabbed her lips with a linen napkin and smiled at me again. Sweet as artificial sweetener. You deserve peace now, Margaret. Somewhere simpler. Somewhere easier. Easier for whom, I wondered. The rain grew heavier outside. Ethan excused himself to answer a phone call, leaving me alone with her for the first time all evening. She leaned back slightly in her chair and lowered her voice. Daniel worried about what would happen after he was gone, she said softly. He knew this house couldn't stay in your hands forever. I looked at her then. Really looked at her. At the diamond bracelet on her wrist Ethan supposedly couldn't afford. At the calmness in her expression. At the confidence of someone who believed the game was already over. And for the first time since Daniel died, I remembered the envelope hidden inside his study drawer upstairs. The one marked in his uneven handwriting. For Margaret. Only if necessary. Upstairs, beyond the silence of the hallway and the closed office door no one else had entered yet, my husband had left me something he never wanted the family to see. And suddenly, sitting there beneath the dim dining room light while my daughter-in-law quietly planned my future like a business transaction, I realized why. I waited until nearly midnight before going upstairs to Daniel's office. The hallway lights were off except for the small lamp near the staircase, casting a pale amber glow across the hardwood floor. For 38 years that office had been his sanctuary. Even Ethan used to knock. Before entering when he was a boy, Daniel believed every man needed one room where he could hear himself think. After the funeral, Vanessa suggested turning it into a guest suite. She said it casually while pouring coffee for visitors, but I noticed how quickly her eyes moved toward the filing cabinets when she thought nobody was paying attention. I slipped inside and quietly closed the door behind me. The room still smelled faintly of cedarwood and the dark roast coffee Daniel drank every morning at exactly 6:15. His leather chair remained pushed slightly away from the desk, as if he had only stepped out for a moment. On the bookshelf beside the window sat framed photographs from another version of our life. Ethan at 10 years old holding a fishing pole nearly taller than himself. Daniel grinning beside our old station wagon during a cross-country road trip to Colorado. Me standing barefoot on a beach in Cape Cod with my hair blowing wildly across my face while Daniel laughed behind the camera. We looked happy in those pictures because we were. At least I thought we were. I opened the center drawer carefully. The envelope rested exactly where Daniel always kept important papers, beneath an old tax folder and beside his reading glasses. My name was written across the front in blue ink. Margaret. The handwriting looked shakier than I remembered. Cancer had weakened his hands during those final months, though he tried hard not to show it. I sat down slowly in his chair before opening it. Inside was a folded letter, and a sealed document stamped with the logo of a laboratory in Chicago. For a moment I simply stared at it while the rain tapped softly against the office windows. Somewhere downstairs, the refrigerator hummed in the silence. The entire house felt suspended between past and future, waiting for me to understand something I had somehow missed all these years. I unfolded the letter first. Margaret, if you are reading this, it means the family has already shown you who they truly are. I stopped breathing for a second. Daniel had always chosen his words carefully. Even his anger came quietly. Especially his anger. There was more beneath it. I know you will blame yourself for what happened to this family. Please do not. Some truths survive longer hidden. Others rot everything around them. I kept reading, my fingers trembling now despite myself. Ethan must never know until after I am gone. I did not raise him to carry shame that belongs to the mistakes of adults. My stomach tightened instantly. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. I looked toward the sealed laboratory document still lying in my lap. Suddenly I did not want to open it anymore. Deep down, part of me already knew. Daniel had discovered something years ago. Something large enough to sit silently between us for decades without ever being spoken aloud. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. Memories returned in fragments. Daniel growing distant during Ethan's senior year of high school. Long evenings spent alone in the garage. Questions he almost asked but never fully finished. And then the strange tenderness afterward. The way he held my hand during church services. The way he kissed my forehead every night before bed. As if forgiving me for something I had never confessed. Downstairs I heard the front door close softly. Ethan and Vanessa were leaving for the night. Vanessa's heels clicked sharply across the foyer tile while Ethan said something too quietly for me to hear. Then silence again. I opened the laboratory document with slow, careful hands. The words blurred at first before finally settling into focus beneath the desk lamp. Probability of paternity 0%. I stared at the page for a long time without moving. The clock on Daniel's bookshelf ticked steadily beside me. 1 second. Then another. 32 years of marriage suddenly rearranged themselves inside my mind like furniture in a dark room. I did not sleep that night. I remained in Daniel's office until dawn, staring at the laboratory report beneath the desk lamp while memories rose slowly around me like dust disturbed from old furniture. The truth should have shattered me immediately, but it did not. The real pain came from understanding how long Daniel had carried it alone. 32 years. 32 years of birthday candles, school graduations, mortgage payments, family vacations, and quiet Sunday mornings drinking coffee together, while this secret sat silently between us like a third marriage vow neither of us acknowledged aloud. Around 4 in the morning I walked downstairs and stood barefoot in the kitchen. The tile felt cold beneath my feet. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the backyard slick and silver beneath the porch lights. Daniel used to say the house sounded different after a storm. Calmer. Cleaner somehow. I opened the refrigerator and stared absently at the leftover food from dinner. Vanessa's untouched cheesecake sat neatly wrapped beside a bowl of fruit nobody ever ate. Everything looked painfully ordinary. That was the cruelest thing about family secrets. They lived comfortably beside normal life. I made coffee using Daniel's old drip machine even though the newer one worked faster. He hated modern appliances. Said they removed all patience from people. The smell filled the kitchen slowly, warm and familiar. For a moment, I almost expected to hear his footsteps coming down the stairs in those worn brown slippers he refused to throw away. Instead, the house remained silent. I carried my coffee into the den and noticed something strange immediately. One of the cabinet drawers beneath the television was slightly open. Vanessa had been searching through the house while I slept upstairs. I already knew it before touching anything. The drawer contained old warranty papers, photo albums, and financial folders Daniel organized obsessively every January. Several folders had been shifted out of place. Careless. Rushed. I closed the drawer gently and sat on the couch. Across the room hung a framed photograph from Ethan's wedding day. Vanessa stood between Ethan and me, smiling brightly into the camera, while Daniel rested one hand on my shoulder. Looking at it now, I noticed details I had ignored before. Vanessa's eyes were not warm in that picture. Victorious, perhaps. Possessive. Like someone arriving at the final stage of a long, careful plan. At 9 o'clock that morning, my phone rang. Claire Bennett. I had not spoken to her since the funeral luncheon. Claire and Daniel worked together. Years ago, before she retired from the accounting firm downtown. She was one of the few people Daniel trusted completely. Margaret, she said quietly after I answered. We need to meet somewhere private. Her voice sounded strained. Measured. I looked toward the staircase instinctively, even though nobody else was home. Ethan and Vanessa had taken the grandchildren to brunch according to the note left on the kitchen counter. Is something wrong? I asked. There was a pause long enough for me to hear traffic passing faintly through her phone. Daniel hired a private investigator last year, she finally said. My fingers tightened around the coffee mug. What are you talking about? Another silence. Then softer this time, almost apologetic. He was not investigating Vanessa, Margaret. He was investigating Ethan. I felt something inside me go completely still. Not fear exactly. More like recognition. Like hearing a song you have not heard in decades, but somehow still remember perfectly. Claire exhaled slowly before continuing. There are things Daniel wanted you to know after he was gone. He made me promise. Outside the den windows, the morning sky had turned pale gray over the neighborhood. Sprinklers hissed softly across distant lawns while somewhere down the street a dog barked twice and stopped. The world looked painfully normal while my entire life quietly rearranged itself again. I met Claire the following afternoon at a small cafe near the riverfront downtown, the kind of quiet place filled with retired couples and people working silently on laptops beside untouched pastries. Rain clouds still hung low over the city, turning the windows gray. Claire was already seated in the far corner when I arrived, wearing a beige wool coat despite the mild spring weather. She looked older than I remembered from the funeral. Not weaker. Just tired in the way people become after carrying information too heavy for too long. A second coffee sat waiting across from her. Daniel always used to arrive early too. I slipped into the chair carefully and placed my purse beside my feet. For a moment neither of us spoke. Claire simply wrapped both hands around her mug while watching the steam rise slowly into the air between us. He found out 8 months ago, she finally said quietly. I stared at her without answering. Around us, dishes clinked softly behind the counter while an old Frank Sinatra song played low through hidden speakers. The world outside continued moving as though families did not collapse every day beneath ordinary skies. Daniel hired a private investigator after noticing unusual bank transfers connected to Ethan, Claire continued. At first he thought Vanessa was manipulating him financially. I looked down at the untouched coffee in front of me. That sounded believable. Vanessa always paid close attention whenever money entered a conversation. She remembered birthdays only when expensive gifts were involved. She volunteered for charity events only if photographs appeared in the local paper afterward. Daniel noticed these things long before I did. But he rarely criticized people directly. He simply watched quietly until patterns revealed themselves. The investigator uncovered something else instead, Claire said softly. My chest tightened. I already knew where the conversation was heading, but hearing another person speak it aloud made the truth feel heavier somehow. Claire opened her purse and slid a thin manila folder across the table toward me. Daniel wanted you to have this after he passed. I hesitated before touching it. The folder felt strangely warm from her hands. Inside were copies of financial reports, old photographs, and several typed summaries from the investigator. My eyes stopped immediately on one photograph near the bottom. Ethan standing outside a downtown office building speaking with a tall dark-haired man I had never seen before. They looked alike in a way that turned my stomach instantly. Not identical, just familiar around the eyes. Who is he? I asked quietly. Claire lowered her gaze. His name is Michael Reed. The name hit me like cold water. I had not heard it spoken aloud in over 3 decades. Not since one terrible summer during the roughest year of my marriage to Daniel. Back then Daniel worked 14-hour days building his company while I sat alone in a half-finished suburban house with a toddler and unpaid bills stacked on the kitchen counter. Michael worked at the architecture firm handling Daniel's office expansion. He was kind, attentive. He listened when I spoke. The entire mistake lasted less than 2 months. A brief emotional escape during a lonely season of my life that I buried so deeply afterward. I convinced myself it had disappeared forever. I swallowed carefully. Daniel knew, I whispered. Claire nodded once. Slowly. He found out after Ethan turned 18. He did the test privately and never told anyone. I stared out the rain-streaked cafe window while memories returned in fragments sharp enough to hurt. Daniel growing quiet during Ethan's college years. Long drives alone at night. Sleepless pacing across the backyard patio after midnight. And then, strangely, more tenderness afterward instead of anger. More patience. More forgiveness. Claire's voice softened even further. Margaret, the investigator, also found something else. Daniel was not preparing to punish you. I looked back at her. Then what was he preparing for? Claire hesitated before answering. He believed Ethan and Vanessa were waiting for him to die. I drove home from the cafe with both hands tight on the steering wheel even though traffic was light, and the roads were nearly empty from the lingering rain. Claire's words repeated quietly inside my head the entire drive. Daniel believed Ethan and Vanessa were waiting for him to die. The sentence sounded cruel at first, almost impossible, but once spoken aloud it attached itself to memories I could no longer ignore. Small moments. Careless comments. The way Vanessa once asked about life insurance during Thanksgiving dessert, while Daniel was still recovering from surgery. The way Ethan stopped discussing business decisions directly with his father during the last year of his illness, preferring private conversations with accountants and attorneys instead. Things I dismissed at the time because mothers become experts at protecting their children from suspicion. By the time I reached the house, the afternoon sky had turned pale blue behind thinning clouds. Ethan's SUV was parked in the driveway beside Vanessa's white Lexus. Through the front windows I could see movement inside the kitchen. I sat in the car for a moment longer before stepping out. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the smell of lemon cleaning spray lingered heavily in the air. Vanessa stood at the kitchen island sorting through stacks of paperwork, while Ethan leaned against the counter scrolling through his phone. Both looked up when I entered. Vanessa smiled first. Smooth. Immediate. Margaret, she said warmly. We were starting to worry about you. Worry. Another polite word hiding sharper intentions underneath. I set my purse carefully on the hallway table and removed my coat. I had lunch with Claire Bennett, I replied. The silence that followed lasted less than 2 seconds, but it was enough. Vanessa's fingers paused against the papers. Ethan straightened slightly without lifting his eyes fully toward mine. Tiny reactions. Daniel used to notice those too. Claire has always been dramatic, Vanessa said lightly as she resumed organizing the documents, especially after retirement. Too much free time. I walked farther into the kitchen slowly. Several folders lay open across the marble countertop. Bank statements. Insurance forms. Property tax records. My name appeared repeatedly across pages nobody had asked permission to access. Ethan finally cleared his throat. We were actually trying to help organize things, he explained quickly. Dad handled everything himself for years. Dad. Not Daniel. Not my husband. Just Dad. Functional. Distant. I nodded once and moved toward the coffee machine. That was thoughtful, I said quietly. Vanessa watched me carefully now. Measuring something. You should not have to manage all the stress alone at your age, she added. Honestly, Ethan and I were discussing options that might make life easier for everyone. There it was again. Easier for everyone. I poured coffee slowly into one of Daniel's old ceramic mugs. The blue one with a tiny crack near the handle he refused to throw away because Ethan painted it at summer camp when he was 8 years old. Funny how ordinary objects survive even when families do not. What kind of options? I asked. Ethan exchanged a quick glance with Vanessa before answering. Maybe downsizing eventually. Selling the house while the market is strong. I looked around the kitchen quietly. Morning light touched the oak cabinets Daniel installed himself 25 years ago, after watching home renovation shows for an entire winter. The brass clock above the stove still ticked softly beside framed school photographs of Ethan through the years. First grade. Baseball uniforms. Graduation robes. A life built piece by piece. Vanessa folded another stack of papers neatly. You deserve peace now, she said gently. A smaller place. Less responsibility. I wrapped both hands around the warm coffee mug and studied her face carefully. Calm. Patient. Confident. The expression of someone already spending money she did not yet own. Upstairs, hidden inside Daniel's office drawer, rested the second unopened letter I had not yet read. And suddenly, standing there in the kitchen while my son quietly avoided my eyes and my daughter-in-law reorganized my future across the marble counter, I realized Daniel had not left those letters behind to punish me for the past. He left them to prepare me for what was coming next. That evening Vanessa suggested we have dinner together as a family. The invitation sounded spontaneous, but nothing about Vanessa was ever spontaneous. By 6:30 the dining room table was set with white candles, folded linen napkins, and the expensive china she only used when she wanted to impress someone. Ethan grilled steaks outside on the patio while Vanessa moved through the kitchen with controlled elegance, opening wine bottles and adjusting serving dishes as though she were hosting a charity fundraiser instead of discussing my future. I stayed quiet and watched. Daniel used to say people reveal themselves most clearly when they believe they have already won. The grandchildren sat at the far end of the table talking softly about school projects and summer plans, blissfully untouched by the tension moving beneath the surface of the room. I envied them for that. Childhood protects people from truths adults spend years hiding from each other. Vanessa carried in the salad bowl and smiled brightly toward me. I thought maybe next month we could all visit some retirement communities nearby, she said casually while taking her seat. Just to explore options. Ethan kept cutting his steak without looking up. I lifted my water glass slowly. That sounds efficient, I replied. Vanessa nodded, encouraged by my calmness. There is one near the lake with wonderful amenities. Private gardens. Yoga classes. A beautiful reading lounge. A reading lounge. As though polished furniture and watercolor paintings could soften the humiliation of being quietly removed from your own life. The candles flickered softly between us while silverware tapped against porcelain plates. Outside the windows, the backyard looked dark and still beneath the patio lights Daniel installed years ago after insisting the house should always feel welcoming at night. I wondered what he would think if he could see us now. His son discussing retirement homes before the flowers from the funeral had even fully dried. Dad always worried about you being alone here, Ethan finally said. His voice sounded rehearsed. Vanessa reached over and touched his wrist gently, a gesture practiced enough to appear natural. Maintenance on a property this size is exhausting, she added. Especially for someone your age. Someone your age. Not mother. Not Margaret. Just a category now. A problem to solve neatly and efficiently. I placed my fork beside my plate and looked toward the family photographs lining the dining room wall. Thanksgiving dinners. Beach vacations. Christmas mornings beside over-decorated trees Daniel pretended to dislike every year. In nearly every picture, Vanessa stood slightly closer to the center than everyone else. I noticed that for the first time now, slowly moving herself inward over the years, until she occupied the emotional space that once belonged to me. We only want what is best for you, she continued softly. This house carries too many memories anyway. That sentence stayed with me. Too many memories. I wondered if she realized memories were the only things truly keeping the house alive anymore. The wood floors still creaked where Daniel stepped every morning. The staircase railing still carried faint scratches from Ethan's toy trucks when he was 7. Even the kitchen windows reflected sunlight exactly the way they had on the afternoon Daniel first carried me across the threshold 38 years ago. Ethan finally looked at me then. Briefly. There was guilt in his eyes. but not enough to stop what was happening. Not enough to challenge her. Across the table, Vanessa sipped her wine with quiet confidence. She believed I was weak because I remained polite. She mistook silence for surrender. Daniel never made that mistake. After dinner, while everyone moved into the living room for dessert, I stayed behind collecting plates alone beneath the dim chandelier light. The kitchen faucet ran softly while warm water filled the sink. Upstairs, inside Daniel's locked office, the second unopened letter waited in the drawer exactly where I left it. And for the first time since his funeral, I understood something clearly. Daniel had spent the final year of his life preparing me for betrayal he knew was already unfolding inside our family. After everyone left that night, I stood alone in the kitchen long after the dishwasher finished running. The house had settled into silence again, the kind that becomes louder after difficult conversations. A single lamp glowed above the stove, casting soft yellow light across the countertops while rain began tapping lightly against the windows once more. I dried my hands carefully with a dish towel and looked toward the staircase. Upstairs, Daniel's second letter waited. For nearly an hour I delayed opening it. I walked through the house instead, touching ordinary things as though they might steady me somehow. The back of Daniel's recliner in the den. The hallway frame where we measured Ethan's height every birthday until college. The piano in the sitting room that nobody played anymore after Daniel's arthritis worsened. Every object seemed connected to a version of our family that no longer existed. Finally, just after midnight, I climbed the stairs and unlocked the office door. The room smelled faintly of old paper and cedarwood again. Outside, wind moved softly through the maple trees lining the backyard fence. I sat behind Daniel's desk and opened the second envelope with slower hands this time. Inside was another handwritten letter folded beside several legal documents clipped neatly together. Margaret, if you are reading this letter, then Ethan and Vanessa have already begun trying to move you out of the house. I closed my eyes briefly. Even now, Daniel's understanding of people unsettled me. He had seen everything clearly while I continued pretending our family only needed patience and kindness to survive. There was more beneath it. I spent too many years believing loyalty could be inherited. It cannot. Character reveals itself only when money, illness, or death enters the room. My throat tightened painfully as I kept reading. Ethan is not my biological son, but he became my son the day I chose to stay. Nothing will ever change that truth for me. I looked down at Daniel's handwriting for a long moment. Even in anger, he remained careful with language. That was who he was. A man who built entire emotional walls out of restraint and dignity. The next paragraph stopped me completely. I changed the structure of the estate 6 months ago. Quietly. Neither Ethan nor Vanessa knows the trust cannot be accessed without your approval. I stared at the attached documents immediately. Trust agreements. Property records. Financial amendments signed and notarized months before Daniel died. The house. The investment accounts. The lake property in Vermont. Everything had been transferred into a protected family trust under my legal control. Ethan's access was conditional. Vanessa's name appeared nowhere. I leaned back slowly in the chair while the grandfather clock in the hallway ticked past midnight. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed softly through the silence. Daniel had known. Not just about the past. About all of it. The manipulation. The waiting. The careful pressure Vanessa applied around money and inheritance. He had seen it unfolding while cancer quietly hollowed out his body one appointment at a time. And instead of confronting them openly, he prepared safeguards. Quietly. Methodically. Like a man protecting his home from a storm he knew was coming. At the very bottom of the letter, beneath his signature, one final sentence had been added in shakier handwriting than the rest. Do not let guilt make you weak, Maggie. I forgave you years ago, but I never ignored what they became. I covered my mouth with my hand then because suddenly the grief hit differently. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just deep enough to make breathing difficult for a moment. Daniel had carried my mistake for decades without humiliating me once. Meanwhile, the people we raised and welcomed into this family were already planning where to place me after the funeral flowers disappeared. Downstairs, my phone vibrated softly against the kitchen counter. I walked down slowly and looked at the screen. A text message from Vanessa. I think tomorrow would be a good day to discuss selling the house. I stood there staring at those words while rain slid quietly down the dark windows behind me. Then, for the first time since Daniel died, I smiled. The meeting with the estate attorney was scheduled for Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. Vanessa insisted on driving separately even though Ethan offered to pick me up. "It is easier this way," she said over the phone the night before. Easier. That word again. By now I understood it perfectly. Easier meant controlled. Easier meant they could discuss me privately without worrying whether I overheard something inconvenient. I arrived at the law office 10 minutes early wearing the navy wool coat Daniel bought me during our anniversary trip to Boston years ago. The receptionist recognized my name immediately and offered coffee while I waited. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could already see Vanessa arranging folders neatly across the polished table, while Ethan stared down at his phone with the same distant expression he had carried for weeks. Neither noticed me at first. Vanessa was speaking quietly but firmly. "The property taxes alone make the house impractical," she said. "And honestly, Margaret needs less stress right now. Needs less stress." As though removing me from my own home was some act of mercy, I stepped into the conference room without announcing myself. Vanessa's smile appeared. Instantly polished and practiced. "Margaret," she said warmly, "you look wonderful." I took the chair beside Ethan instead of across from them. He glanced at me briefly before looking away again. The attorney entered moments later carrying a thick leather file. His name was Richard Coleman, a careful gray-haired man Daniel trusted for nearly 20 years. I noticed something immediately. Richard did not greet Ethan first. He greeted me. "Mrs. Holloway," he said gently, shaking my hand with unusual seriousness. "I am very sorry for your loss." Vanessa folded her hands together on the table. "We were hoping to discuss next steps regarding the estate and property management," she said smoothly before anyone else could speak. Richard looked at her for a long moment without responding. Then he opened the file slowly. "Actually," he said, adjusting his glasses, "there are several details regarding Daniel's final revisions that need clarification first." Ethan finally looked up. Vanessa's posture stiffened almost invisibly. Tiny reactions again. Daniel would have noticed them instantly. Richard removed a stack of notarized documents from the folder and placed them carefully on the table. 6 months ago, Daniel restructured the entirety of his estate into a protected family trust. Silence settled across the room immediately. Outside the conference windows, traffic moved quietly along the downtown street below while somewhere in the hallway, a copier hummed faintly. Vanessa blinked once. "I am sorry," she said carefully. "What exactly does that mean?" Richard folded his hands. "It means the primary authority over all assets now belongs to Margaret Holloway." Ethan frowned immediately. "That cannot be right." Richard slid the documents toward him. "It is entirely correct." I remained silent while Ethan scanned the papers faster and faster, confusion slowly draining color from his face. Vanessa leaned toward him sharply. "Let me see that." Her voice had lost its softness now. No warmth. No polished concern. Just irritation cracking through the surface. Richard continued calmly. "The house, investment accounts, and all associated properties are protected under the trust. No sale or transfer can occur without Mrs. Holloway's direct approval." Vanessa stared at the documents for several seconds before forcing another smile toward me. But this one arrived too late. Too stiff. "Well," she said lightly, "I suppose Daniel simply wanted to make sure Margaret felt secure." Richard looked directly at her then. "Actually," he replied quietly, "Daniel included a written statement regarding his reasons." The room became very still. Ethan slowly lowered the papers into his lap while Vanessa's fingers tightened around her pen. Richard opened another page and began reading aloud. "Character reveals itself most clearly after death enters a family. If pressure is placed upon Margaret regarding property or finances, all inheritance access for secondary beneficiaries is to be permanently suspended." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Across the table, Vanessa's expression finally changed completely. Not grief. Not shock. Something colder. Something exposed. No one spoke for several seconds after Richard finished reading Daniel's statement. The silence inside the conference room felt heavier than any argument could have. Ethan stared at the documents spread across the polished table, as though the pages might rearrange themselves if he looked long enough. Vanessa sat perfectly still beside him, but the calmness she wore so carefully for years had finally begun to crack around the edges. Richard closed the file quietly and folded his hands. "There is one additional instruction," he said. Ethan looked up immediately. "What instruction?" His voice sounded thinner now. "Tired." Richard glanced toward me before continuing. "If Mrs. Holloway chooses to sell the primary residence, all proceeds remain solely under her control. No secondary beneficiary has legal claim, unless she authorizes distribution personally." Vanessa leaned back slowly in her chair. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, she looked genuinely uncertain. Not emotional, not remorseful, just uncertain. The difference mattered. Outside the office windows, sunlight finally pushed through the clouds and spilled across the conference table in pale gold strips. I watched dust drift lazily through the light while Daniel's words echoed quietly inside my mind. Character reveals itself most clearly after death enters a family. He had known exactly what would happen. Not because he distrusted everyone, because he understood them too well. Ethan rubbed both hands across his face before speaking again. "Mom," he said carefully, "this is obviously a misunderstanding." I looked at him quietly. There was a time when that face belonged entirely to a little boy who waited by the front window every evening for Daniel's car headlights to appear in the driveway. A little boy who cried when Daniel missed baseball practice because of work. A little boy Daniel loved completely without conditions. Love was strange that way. It ignored biology whenever it wanted to. Vanessa turned toward me with a softer expression now, rebuilding her voice piece by piece. "Margaret, nobody was trying to pressure you," she said gently. "We only wanted to help you make practical decisions." Practical. Another polished word hiding greed beneath it. Richard remained silent. He had probably seen families collapse this way before. Quietly. Legally. Around conference tables instead of hospital rooms. I reached into my purse slowly and removed the second letter Daniel wrote me. The paper felt softer now from being unfolded so many times. "Daniel spent the last year preparing for this meeting," I said calmly. Ethan looked at me then. Really looked at me for the first time in weeks. There was confusion in his eyes now, and shame beginning underneath it. He knew exactly what was happening inside this family. Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but stopped herself. Maybe she finally realized no performance remained useful anymore. Some masks only survive until the truth enters the room. Richard gathered the documents neatly back into the leather folder. "Mrs. Holloway," he said gently, "all decisions moving forward belong entirely to you." I nodded once. Simple. Quiet. Final. The meeting ended shortly afterward. Ethan walked beside me toward the elevator while Vanessa stayed behind speaking sharply to Richard in a lowered voice. Through the glass walls, I could see her gesturing toward the paperwork. With growing frustration, Ethan stared ahead at the elevator doors without speaking. Finally, just before they opened, he whispered something so softly I almost did not hear it. "Did Dad hate me?" The question settled heavily between us. I looked at my son for a long moment before answering. "No," I said quietly. "Your father loved you more than you ever understood." The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Downstairs, sunlight warmed the sidewalks for the first time in days. People crossed intersections carrying coffees and briefcases, living ordinary lives untouched by our family's unraveling. I stepped outside slowly and breathed in the cool spring air. Across the street, reflected in the dark glass of a nearby building, I caught sight of myself standing alone in Daniel's navy coat beneath the brightening sky. Older now. Sadder perhaps. But not broken. Not defeated. Daniel had left me more than money or property. He left me clarity. And sometimes clarity arrives too late to save a family, but still early enough to save yourself.